Hey guys, I'm Angela and welcome back to Hobby Night. Today I wanted to paint up one of my all-time favorite characters from Star Wars, Darth Maul. You may or may not have noticed that I've become a little obsessed with Star Wars recently. I've been playing the LEGO Star Wars, the Skywalker saga on our Let's Plays on Saturdays. We just started a podcast where the discussion topic is all about the new series of Bad Batch, which is also Star Wars. So I thought we'd continue that trend today with a painting tutorial focused on Star Wars Legion. Specifically, I want to paint up the Darth Maul that comes in the Shadow Collective box set because I've had that for a little while now. And this is one of my favorite versions of Maul. This is when he's got his robot legs, but he's still got his double saber. He's commanding some Mandalorians, which is really cool. They actually come in the box set as well. And I've been building those up when I've been doing some hobby live streaming recently. So again, it's all connected. And without further ado, I think we should get my Maul painted up in some Gray Seer primer so we can actually start working on the model. With the model now primed and ready to go, I wanted to go ahead and start with the section that I thought was going to be the most difficult about this paint job, and that is his tattooed face. Now for the reds, I want something bold and bright, and for the blacks, I want something deep and dark, and I think I have the perfect two contrast colors for this. Let's start with the red first. For this, I'm going to go with the classic Blood Angels red. I absolutely love this color tone, and I think it fits his flesh color tone very, very well. I'm going to paint the entirety of his head and chest using this color, even though I know a lot of it will end up getting covered with some black paint, but this will help make sure that everything that gets covered is even and all the same coloring because it'll have that same red base coat beneath it. Once I'm satisfied with that, we can move on to the part that honestly has me the most nervous about this particular paint job, and that's doing the black details of his tattoos. Now, I made sure to pull up good reference of Darth Maul when I was doing this to make sure that I got it as accurate as possible because I really want to do this character justice as he is one of my all-time favorites. This took a lot of time and I decided to go with Black Legion because it's a little bit more of an opaque color tone, but I did end up needing 2 layers of this because it is still a contrast color and still has a small amount of transparency, and I want this to look as deep and dark as possible. Once I was satisfied with that, we can move on to the rest of Darth Maul, starting with his clothing. Now, unfortunately, the Star Wars characters aren't always as vibrant as I would prefer them, so we're going to be playing with some muted colors next when it comes to Maul's outfit. For his pants, we're going to be sticking with Gargak Sewer because I just think it's a really nice brown color tone, and I thought it matched what they did in both the cartoon and on his figures when I was looking up reference material. After that, we're going to move on to his cloak and his cape, and I guess his robes. It's his entire rest of his outfit basically, and that needs a nice coating of Black Templar. I decided to go with Black Templar over Black Legion because I wanted it to look distinctly different from the tattoo work that I've already put on his face. I also really like how this color settled into the recesses and gave me some really nice natural highlights and shadows, which I don't think I would have gotten with the more opaque Black Legion. Once we are done with that and we've painted up his robes, his belt, and his gloves, we're going to move on to the final metallic metal part that we need to go with, which is with Basilicanum Gray. This is going to go on, of course, his robot legs, but also any of the details remaining on his clothes, specifically when it comes to the belt as well as his gloves. Hey guys, I just wanted to jump in and let you know that I've recently started live streaming. So if you never want to miss those, or if you've been enjoying the content you're watching today, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for notifications. Now, let's go ahead and jump back to the video. I'm really pleased with how Darth Maul is turning out, but we do have a couple of major details left to take care of. First and foremost, there are some details on his belt that always appear to be yellow or goldish, which I'm going to be using a little bit of Nazdrag yellow for. After that, I'm going to move over to matte white from the Army Painter because there's also tends to be like a little bit of a white buckle indicated on his belt as well. So I wanted to get that cleaned up and just looking as bright as possible because that's always how it looks, again, in my reference material. I'm also going to use this color tone on his saber because I want to brighten it up a little bit so that I get as pure as possible a red from this coloring when I put that on in a bit. Once I'm satisfied with that, we're going to move on to his horns, which are going to get a nice coating of Skeleton Horde. I actually think Skeleton Horde is the perfect color tone for his horns. When I was looking at it, I don't know, it really worked for me, so I'm super pleased with how this particular element came out. With that done, the last thing we need to take care of on Maul himself is his lightsaber. And for this, I'm gonna go back to Blood Angel's red. I'm gonna put a nice even coating on both sides of the saber, and then once that has had time to fully dry, to make it stand out a little bit differently from the rest of the model, I'm gonna put a coating of Ard Coat on there, which is going to give it a glossy finish. You can use whatever glossy finish that you want, but I did really like the finish that Ard Coat gave me, which I have very rarely used, but I really should put into my repertoire a bit more. For the base, I'm keeping it very simple. He has a nice little stone that he's standing on, and we'll take care of that in a bit. But for the groundwork, we're just going to put some Armageddon dust down, cover it with a brown wash. I use Seraphim Sepia, and then give it a final dry brush using Hoggrott's Flesh, which is one of the newer colors from Citadel. After that, we're going to take care of the limestone that he's standing on. And for this, I decided to go with khaki green, or actually it's Krieg khaki, as I believe the actual color tone, but it's this really, really pale yellow-green color. And then after that, I gave it a wash of Mortarion grime, which gave it this little tint of an even more green color tone. And again, I think this made it really look like limestone, and I absolutely love the vibe of it. So now we just need to assemble the model up, and we can look at the final piece. And here he is, Darth Maul. If it wouldn't get us copyright struck, I'd be like humming his theme, but I can't because it probably would, and all of my other stuff gets copyright struck enough, so let's not go there. But I'm really, really pleased with how this model has turned out. I think the most anxiety-inducing thing about it was painting up his face. I really wanted to nail that, and I think I did. I took my time, free-handed it a little bit, and I absolutely love the results. And one of the things that I just want to compliment Star Wars Legion in regards to its models and what Atomic Mass has done with them is they gave me pretty good guidelines for where some of those patterns were supposed to go in the first place. So following my reference and those made it very simple to paint when I was very worried about it. I just really thought that was a nice little element about this, and I found that a little bit as I've been painting up the Star Wars Legion models, so I just think it's a nice compliment to them. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed me painting up this Star Wars Legion model. If you want to see me paint up additional Star Wars Legion models, make sure to leave a like. Let me know down in the comments which one maybe you want to see me paint up, and be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss those tutorials as they come out. Before I head out, I do want to give a huge thank you to my patrons for making it so content like this can continue to happen. Without your guys' support, we wouldn't be doing this, so thank you very, very much. I have been Angela, and I hope you have a wonderful hobby night. Today, I'm painting up the coolest, most badass bounty hunter in the entire Outer Rim, Cad Bane. Oh, and if you're wondering about that other bounty hunter, well, he's running a youth program on Tatooine now, so he doesn't really count. I've also been playing a ton of the Old Republic as a bounty hunter, so bounty hunters have been just on my mind, and I saw on my shelf sitting there calling to me Cad Bane, and I thought, you know what, I just painted up Darth Maul, one of my favorite characters from Star Wars. I actually really like Cad Bane. I think he's a very cool character. I love the whole history of why he has those tubes in his neck so they can avoid choke forcing and actually being able to still breathe. I just think that's so rad. So I thought today I'd go ahead and paint him up and show you how you can get some really effective uses out of your contrast paints to create some cool leather effects. Without further ado, we're gonna get the model primed up in grace here and get to painting. Since the release of Contrast 2.0, we've seen a much larger expansion of blues for me to play with, and so I did a little bit of testing before working on Cad Bane's flesh to see which would fit his flesh tone perfectly, because I specifically want to go with the Cad Bane from the Clone Wars. He is my favorite version of Cad Bane, and I really like the blue color tone they use on him. So I ultimately decided to go with a tried and true Talisar blue. I think this fits perfectly. We're gonna apply this to his face and his hands. Once I have this down and it's dried fully, I'm gonna go back in, clean up his eyes a little bit so that I can then apply some ball red. I wanted a bright, almost pinkish colored red for his eyes because I think the contrast against the blue that I've used is gonna be perfect, and I think ball red is absolutely the correct choice here. Once I'm done and satisfied with his face, I can move on to some of the more recessed details of his outfit. starting with that cowl that he has around his head, which I assume is for insulation of some type. I don't actually know, but what I do know is we're going to be painting it up using some Black Templar. After that has dried, we're going to move on to Wildwood, which is going to go on his inner shirt. I was a little concerned at first that the Wildwood color tone would be a little too dark and blend in too much with the Black Templar, but they stand out beautifully against each other, and I'm really liking the effects that I have with his more muted color tones against his bright, bold blue face. Now that we have these colors down, I was looking at that face and going, you know, I could push this a little bit more. So I decided to put a blue wash over him to settle into all those recesses and add a little bit more depth to all of the creases and his mouth so they stand out a bit more without having to do a lot of highlight, because I already like the base color tone that I have. I think it matches in perfectly, and the wash does exactly what I want it to. Now we can move on to those leathers. Let's move on to the leathers. I decided that I wanted to use Gargax Sewer as the color tone for his jacket, for his pants, for his gloves, as well as his hat, because I wanted something that was going to look like a hardened leather. This is meant to be something that he's wearing all the time. He's keeping it maintained, but it is going to have that wear and tear of leather that has maybe started to dry out a little bit. And I think the way that Gargax Sewer dries into the recesses and all of the folds and everything of all of the fabric that I put it on just does some beautiful stuff. I get some really gorgeous natural highlights, midtones, and shadows. And I use this color all the time now, and there's the reason for it, because I just think it works super well. After I am satisfied with how all of the leathers are looking for all the hard leathers, I want to move on to somewhat the softer leathers. For this, I'm going with Fyreslayer Flesh, a brown color tone that I've not played around with for a while, but I really, really like it. I do go over all of the bags and anything that I want to be the softer leather color tone with 2 coatings of the Fyreslayer Flesh, just to help it blend in a little bit with the slightly darker browns that I've already put on him. But I really like how this sort of pops these details out, especially when it comes to his belt, the bag, and a little bit of detail on his gloves. Once we're done with the leathers, we can move on to all the metallics on the model. And for this, I'm just simply going to go with a bit of Basilicanum Gray. Now, if you look at any character models of Cad Bane online, you'll notice that his guns tend to have 2 different silver tones. And in order to accomplish that, I'm just going to layer up some Basilicanum over some areas and leave it in a single coating on others. This will give me a very natural 2-tone for my silvers, and it works perfectly. After that, we just have some details to take care of and the base. Hey guys, I just wanted to jump in and let you know that I've recently started live streaming. So if you never want to miss those, or if you've been enjoying the content you're watching today, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for notifications. Now, let's go ahead and jump back to the video. All right, we're down to just the details, and there's really actually only 2 colors that we need to use here, and one of them we've already used. We're returning to Black Templar because I was looking at the wrist brace that he has on his arms, and there's a couple cables coming off of them, and they seem to be always painted black, so that's what I'm going to do as well. While I was doing this inspection of the wrist braces, I decided that, or discovered rather, he had some buttons on there that were red, and to make them stand out, I decided to also paint mine red. But instead of using ball red on like I did on the eyes, we're gonna go with Blood Angels red this time. I just wanted to do something that was a little bit different, make the other ones stand out more distinctly from each other, and I really like what this has done to the model. It adds just that extra punch of detail on top of all that really beautiful leather work that I've done. So now all we need to take care of is the base. For the base, I'm keeping it extremely simple. We are going with a texture paint. You can use whatever texture paint that you want, whatever fits with your army. I have been going with Armageddon Dust, so that is what I'm going to spread all over Cad Bane's base, making sure to be extra careful around his feet so I don't get too much of this color tone on them, because I do want them to still look fairly clean. I've been treating this dirt as very compact and hard and not creating a lot of dust and debris onto my models, and I want to maintain that throughout the rest of my models for Star Wars Legion. After that has had plenty of time to dry, I'm going to come back in with a brown wash. You can use something that's appropriate to your base color tone. I went with Seraphim Sepia and let that dry fully as well. Then the final step is to come in with a dry brush, and for this I'm using Hobgrot's Flesh, or I think that's the name of it. It's a light brown color tone. Again, you can... Hobgrot's Hide, that's what it is. Put that on as a dry brush. It brings this nice sort of earthy yellow color tone that I think brightens up the ground just enough to really make Cad Bane stand out beautifully against it. And after that, it's just a little bit of tufting, and we can take a look at the final model. And here he is, my Cad Bane. And also Lego Cad Bane, because I actually used him as reference as well while I was working on this model. A little behind the scenes tip for you, or not even tip, it's really just a trick that I used. I use my Lego figure sometimes as reference. I really like how this particular model came out. I was exceptionally pleased with how the leathers turned out. That was something that I was really excited to work on with this particular model, because Cad Bane's one of those characters where I think they did something very interesting with him. His flesh tone is a really bright, bold, beautiful color tone, whereas his outfit is very almost drab and very neutral, and I like that contrast, and I think I nailed it on my model, and that was really what I was going for. I think you could do a couple of different things in regards to the leathers on Cad Bane. For example, if you didn't want to go quite as dark as Gargax Sewer, you could do snakebite leather instead for the bulk of his leathers, and then pick some adjacent colors that help accent those. But I really like what I got out of it, and I think it matches what I've seen of the character models online, especially for the Clone Wars, which makes me especially happy. If you enjoyed watching this, do make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future painting tutorials or live streams or any of the other content that I'm making, including the hobby news, which will get a new one this Monday. Before I head out, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons for making it so content like this can continue to happen. Your guys' support means the world to me, so thank you very much for being there and making it so we can keep doing this. I have been Angela, and I hope you have a wonderful hobby night. This week, I'm flirting with the light side and painting a Jedi. In the past, I've worked on a lot of Sith and bounty hunters on the channel, but this week, I wanted to paint a Jedi. Not just any Jedi, though, the Jedi, Mark Hamill, aka Luke Skywalker. And not just any Luke Skywalker, though, because as you can see, I have the limited edition Hoth flight jumpsuit set that came out, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. I don't know, I've been sitting on this thing for a while. I really like this version of Luke in particular. The only other version of him that I like the most is when he is goth and emo and hanging out with the Emperor, but this is my other favorite version. I just think the contrast between the snowy Hoth scene and his orange flight suit looks amazing, so I wanted to try my hand at it today. Now, I actually got started on this particular painting tutorial on Tuesday during my hobby live stream this week. I was building an X-Wing out of Lego. I finished it early and I treated everybody that was there to working on the grisaille technique I was going to be doing on this model to get my priming done. Now, grisaille is just a fancy word for slap chop, and if you're not familiar with that, it's a very simple technique. All you do is apply a basic mid-tone for your primer. Then what I do is I put on a shade. This time I use Nuln Oil, let that thoroughly dry, and then to establish some highlights, I went back in with a dry brush using matte white from the Army Painter. This worked out brilliantly. I love what I have going on my model already. Now that I have some absolutely lovely highlights, midtones, and shadows established on my miniature, I want to start getting to some color, and we're going to start with this flight suit that I love so much. I am going to go with my tried and true standard of Griff Hound Orange. I think this looks amazing, and I love immediately what this is doing over top of the grisaille technique that I'd already applied to the model. The highlights especially are popping so well, and I just cannot be more pleased. Now I'm gonna go through this very delicately. Because I did this technique with the slap chop, I don't want to have to do any touch up, so I wanna be very careful not to get this orange color anywhere that it shouldn't be. So I'm gonna switch between different brushes, making sure that they're very appropriate for the sections that I'm painting. Once I am done with the orange, we can go ahead and move on to the rest of his outfit. Now let's start on some of the more neutral color tones on Luke's outfit, starting with his boots. For this, I decided to go with Rattling Grime. I really like the slight brown undertone that this particular gray paint has. I think it works especially well for gray leathers, and that's exactly what I'm going for on his boots, so that's what we're going to use. Once those have dried, we're going to move on to the belt, which I pulled out Gorgontra fur for. Now, this is a little bit of an orange colored brown tone, and when I first applied it, I was actually mildly worried I had made a mistake and that it was gonna blend in too much with the orange that I put on his flight suit. Thankfully, when it dried, it looked distinct enough and I didn't have to worry about it, and I was able to move on to the part I was looking forward to most about his outfit outside of that orange color tone, and that is all the white straps. Now, part of the reason that I did the slap top method on this particular model was because I knew there was going to be a lot of white elements on it, and I really like the effect that this applies when you're basically going for a white paint scheme. And so all I'm going to do to enhance it, soften it a little bit, is using a bit of Soul Blight Gray shade. This is a lovely new shade from Citadel that will just tint the shadow portions of the model the most, and it's going to really make it this uniform white leather appearance. And I absolutely love it because it already looks like he's been out in the snow before even applying any of my weathering technique, which I'm going to be doing at the end. Now it's time to move on to the control panel that's on his chest. And for this, I'm going to bring out Basilicanum Gray. This is why I didn't want to use Basilicanum Gray on his boots and instead went with the Rattling Grime so that I could establish it here as the metallic. Just really like the way Basilicanum looks as a non-metallic metal supplement. Now, once this is onto the chest piece, I'm also going to apply it to the base because there is sort of a ventilation system that he ends up standing on that's peeking out of the snow, and I want to make that metal as well. Once we have those color tones down, I was looking at some reference material for Luke in this particular outfit, and I noticed that on the control panel, there's actually some blue and white buttons, and I wanted to go ahead and paint those on there to make it more on model. So I'm going to just pull out a little bit of Talisar blue and matte white respectively and apply it to a couple of the buttons on the chest. Luke is looking pretty good, except for maybe a little stark white in the face. And we're gonna fix that now by going ahead and applying some Crusader Flesh speed paint to his face in a single thin coat. This works absolutely brilliantly, and I really like the effect that it has, especially as it settles into the eyes to give him a little bit of a heavy brow. But I'm looking at him and we need to do one more thing, and that's take care of his hair and his eyebrows. Thankfully, Star Wars Legion and Atomic Mass games make it really easy for me to paint his eyebrows because they stick up prominently, and I'm able to just glide some aggro dune across it to give him a nice blonde look. Then I'm going to apply this also to the rest of his hair, of course. We're down to the final elements on this particular model. We need to take care of Luke's lightsaber as well as his base. Let's start with the lightsaber because for this, I had some fun ideas. Now, he's obviously still wielding Anakin's lightsaber at this point, which means we need to go for a blue color tone, and I'm going with Frostheart for this. This is a new color tone from Citadel, and I think it works perfectly for that classic blue lightsaber look. But I don't want to just stop there. I've seen some people do a very simple technique to add a little bit of a glow effect to their lightsabers by basically rubbing on a little bit of white paint and building that up until you have a white, bright strip down the middle of the lightsaber, generally onto opposite sides. And that's exactly what I'm doing on Luke's lightsaber, and I think the final effect looks amazing. In fact, I like it so much, I'm probably gonna go back and apply this to both Darth Maul's lightsaber, as well as probably General Grievous and Obi-Wan Kenobi's, because I have them both painted up as well, because I really, really like the way that this turned out. Now, the final thing I need to take care of is his base. And for that, we need to do two things. First, I'm going to put a little bit of Chillbriar Queen on the snow portions to give it a nice white bluish color tone. Then I'm pulling out my weathering powders. That's right, you heard it correctly. I'm gonna pull out some Tamiya weathering powders, and I'm specifically going to be using the one labeled Snow because I'm painting snow, so why not try it? I'm going to apply this to the base as well as to Luke's boots and legs to basically make it look like the powder of the snow that he's been trudging through has been clinging to his outfit. And I just love the way that this turns out. Let's take a look at the final model. And here he is, my very first Luke Skywalker. And honestly, I am incredibly pleased with how this particular model came out. I'm actually more pleased with him than any other Star Wars Legion model that I've painted so far. And I'm a little sad by that because he's not even one of my like top favorite characters from Star Wars. He's actually quite low on the list. But the model was just really fun to paint. I think it's partially because this is the limited edition one and he's in his cool flight suit. And I just think that is a little bit more fun to paint than maybe some of his other outfits. But that being said, I think it was also partially the techniques that I used on this particular paint job that really made it as fun for me as it was. I really like the slap chop method when it comes to establishing your primer on your model. I think having the guidance of knowing where your highlights, midtones, and shadows should be in grayscale and being able to apply color over top of that and then enhancing it works especially well. And that is what I tried to do in this particular paint job. I also got to play more with my weathering powders, which I'm trying to incorporate into my techniques a bit more. I really want to start to use all these techniques that I've been showing you and accumulating them into single projects so that we can see how they all work together, and I hopefully succeeded with that in today's tutorial. Do let me know what you think of my loop down below and what you think you'd like to see me paint next from Star Wars Legion. Now, before I head out, I do want to give a huge thank you to my patrons for making it so that content like this can continue to happen. Without your guys' support, we wouldn't be doing this, so thank you very, very much. I have been Angela, and I hope you have a wonderful hobby night.
Grab your paintbrushes and take cover because today we're painting up some artillery. I'm Angela, you're watching Hobby Night. Now duck! We clear? Whew. I'm really glad that missed us. Now, you may have noticed on the channel, I've been painting a lot of space wizards, and that has actually got me in the mood for painting some real-world military. So I was looking at my Imperial Guard list for Warhammer, going, what can I add to these boys to really satisfy wanting to paint both infantry and some big, big guns? Well, I found my field ordnance battery. So I'm going to be painting up one of these today using a quick and easy method using contrast paints. But when we're done with that, we're going to grab these Tamiya weathering powders that I've absolutely been loving. We're going to enhance that paint job with these. So without further ado, let's get started. Because this is going to be a very warm color scheme, I decided to base them in Wraithbone. And then I wanted to go ahead and start with the Guardsmen first because I know that they're going to be the most time consuming and I'm going to be using the majority of the colors that I picked out for this particular paint scheme on them. Now, the first thing that I actually want to tackle is their khaki uniform. I'm going to be achieving this by thinning down some skeleton horde and applying it delicately to all of their uniform parts. Now, the reason I'm being extra careful about this is because I find with some of the lighter contrast colors, if you let them pull too heavily into the recesses, you get a really harsh contrast between your shadows and your highlights, and I really don't want this on their uniform. It needs to be nice and soft and pale. So I'm going to pull up any of the excess pooling that I might be seeing in the folds as soon as I see them. We're then going to set them aside to dry and work on some of the accessories that the kit came with, specifically the ammo crates that it came with. I want to paint these up in a dark wooden color tone for a more natural look, and I'm going to be using wildwood for that. I really love this color on a wood grain, and I just think it looks really cool here, but you could do this in a metallic or even an army green color if you wanted to. Now that the Guardsmen are dry, we can go ahead and start working on some of their leather accessories. For this, I'm going with my tried and true classic of Gargax Sewer. I just really like the way that this particular color dries. I think it looks like a nice hardened leather. We're going to apply this to their boots, to their belts, and their gloves, and any other leather accessories that the Guardsmen might have on them. Now, speaking of their boots, I do want to paint them up slightly separately from the wraps that go around them that I just painted in the brown. And for that, I'm going to be using Black Templar. This gets a nice coating over their boots, gives it that classic look, and we can move on to all that fancy armor they're wearing. Now it's time to work on all of that lovely armor, and I'm going to be painting this in a classic green Acadia color scheme, as I mentioned, and I'm going back to a tried and true color that I absolutely love from the contrast line, something that I've used on my Death Guard all of the time, and that is Militarum Green. This is definitely one of my favorite contrast green color tones. I've used it on so many things. We're gonna apply it here to all of their armor, as well as some of the reinforced beams on those ammo crates that we were painting earlier. This way, it ends up making it look like those ammo crates were actually sent to them by the Imperium. They actually belong to them. And it's not like what I do with my orcs where I end up giving them looted materials. Now with the green taken care of, there are still a few things that we need to paint on our guardsmen, specifically their weapons and tools. And for this, I want to go with just a classic gray look. And so for that, I'm going to pull out some Basilicanum Gray. This is my go-to for a really nice non-metallic metal look. And you can really add some variety by thinning or layering up a lot of this paint and adding some variety, which is what I do a little bit on my models. Now, the last thing to take care of on the guardsmen themselves is their faces. I want to pull out Crusader Flesh for this because I used it on Luke previously and I really like the effect I got out of it, so I'm going to apply it to the few places where we have some exposed faces as well as hands. And now that we're done with that, we can work on the big gun. For the big cannon, we're going to be revisiting some of the colors we just used: Militarum Green, Basilicanum Gray, and Black Templar. But you might notice that this footage looks a little bit different, and that's because I actually recorded it on a live stream on Tuesday where you guys could join me at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. This happens every Tuesday. I'm really gonna be focusing on some of the stuff that I'm working on for the Friday videos, and as we approach 10th edition, that's going to include my new 10th edition army. So I do hope that you can join me in the future for the live streams. Again, those happen at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every Tuesday. Now we still have the base and we need to finish getting this model assembled and tufted, so let's go ahead and take care of that next. It's time to work on the base. Now I want this to match what I've done on my other Imperial Guardsmen, but when I was looking at references, I realized I used Sterling Mud on them, and Sterling Mud is a little bit tricky to work with on these larger bases. I just know this from personal experience and I don't want to deal with it. So I'm going to cheat the effect a little bit because the Sterling Mud on those bases is actually very compact. I try to make it look like compact dirt rather than it actually being muddy, and I think I can achieve that using some Armageddon dust. So I'm going to apply that to the base, spread it very thinly, and then let it dry thoroughly. Once it's dried, to help darken it up and make it look a bit more like dirt instead of sand, I'm going to apply some Agrax Earthshade to it. This works perfectly, but I still want to have a little bit of a highlight. So I'm going to come back in with some Talaran Sand, dry brush this over top all those textures, and create that nice highlight that I want. With this complete, we can finally move on to the weathering, which is what I've been looking forward to most about this project. I'm going to be using my Tamiya weathering powders, and we're going to be focusing on 3 in particular. The first one is called Dirt. This is just a nice dark brown. Obviously, you can probably tell why I want to use it. I just talked about how I was making this nice dirt base, and I want to make it look like some of that dirt has ended up on their pants, as well as the ordnance itself. We're going to focus really hard on the tires, as well as the undercarriage and their boots. Once I'm satisfied with how it's looking, we can move on to the cannon itself. Now for the tip, I want to make it look like it's actually had some stuff being fired out of it. And instead of using the soot color tone, I'm actually going to go with the gunmetal color tone. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to add a little bit of a metallic finish to the model. And this does this perfectly. So once we have the gunmetal on the tip, we can move on to the final weathering powder we need to use, which is the silver color tone. This is going to go on all the other metallic parts on not only the cannon, but also on the men themselves, specifically focusing on all of their Imperial Eagles because I want them to shine a little bit, and I absolutely love the effect. With the weathering done, we can now assemble the model back together, making the man sit down on his cannon and then applying that to the base. And once everything has dried to the base, I'm going to go ahead and start tufting it. Now for this, I'm going to be using my Gamer Graphs tufts, and I really like these because the self-adhesive works super well. I picked out 2 different colors, one that has some nice dark browns and greens in it, and one that's a lighter color that complements the khaki on their uniforms. I spread those around, and with that, we can take a look at the final model. And here they are. I absolutely love how this particular model turned out. Between the weathering effects, the tufting, and honestly the very simplistic color scheme, it was a breeze to get through and a lot of fun to work on. And really that's what I'm looking for when I'm painting things. I just want it to be fun and easy and make it so that I want to paint more. And honestly, I have another one of these that I'm probably going to build up, maybe do a different gun, but apply some of the same effects, and I think it's going to look amazing. It really does make me want to work on more of my guardsmen. Now I hope you guys have enjoyed this particular episode and are looking forward to future content. As I mentioned, I do hobby live streams on Tuesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so if you're ever wanting to see what I'm working on early before this Friday video is out, that's the best way to find out without joining my Patreon. Speaking of my Patreon, I want to thank my patrons for making it so content like this can continue to happen. Without your guys' support, we would not be doing this, so thank you very much. I have been Angela, and I hope you have a wonderful hobby night. This week, I have had a vision of blood and fire, and so today I will be adding skulls to the Skull Throne and a Bloodcrusher to my demon army. I'm Angela, you're watching Hobby Night, now let's get to it. That's right. Today I'm going to be painting up a Bloodcrusher, which I think was going to make an ample blood tithe to the blood god, but I am worried that I'm not going to have enough skulls. So, Chaos Cultist, could you come here, please? Could you come here? Come here.
Why?
Come here. I need you for something. Please come here.
Yeah, but I'm busy.
I understand, but you see,
I got stuff to do. I got this game I'm playing. Like, have you heard about this Genshin Impact thing?
You know, I have, but I need your skull, please.
My what?
Skulls for the skull throne! All right, with the skulls now taken care of, let's get to that blood sacrifice and start painting this Bloodcrusher. In order to make my offering to the blood god look as good as possible, I'm going to be using the Grisaille technique today, also known as slap chop. Now the first step of this is to get the model primed up in a standard gray color tone, which ends up just making it look like unpainted sprue, but I promise there's paint on there. Now the next step I actually did live on YouTube, and if you never want to miss the behind the scenes content like this, then make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon for notifications. Now what I actually did on stream was I first applied a Nuln Oil wash to the entirety of the model to help create some nice shadows for us to work with later. After that, and it had fully dried, I came back in with a dry brush using some white paint. I spent like an hour on this, just chatting with people, working on the model, and the reason I took so long was specifically because I didn't want to build the paint up too quickly, ended up getting this really ugly, fuzzy effect that you can sometimes get when you're dry brushing. So I took my time, went really gradually, and I love the effect I got, and now I am ready to start applying some additional paint to this model. Now the next step is to paint the entire model in Blood Angel's red. I know, I just spent a lot of time building up some natural highlights, midtones, and shadows, but this is exactly why we did this. Because once this color is on there, you can see that effort coming to life, and it looks so good. But once it's dried, I actually do want to focus my attention on the bloodletter and the blade of his sword. What we're going to do next is some more dry brushing. First, I'm going to pull out some Wild Rider's Red and apply this liberally to the entirety of the bloodletter and the sword, and then I actually also do apply this a little bit to the Juggernaut's armor. Then I'm going to come back in with Troll Slayer Orange. This we're going to be a little bit more focused with. I don't mind if a little bit of this orange color gets on the bloodletter's flesh, but I want to avoid that as much as possible. So we're going to focus on those raised edges, the spines, and his face. Now we're going to move on to some Imperial Yellow. This is our final highlight color to really make this guy look fiery and warm. And what we're going to be doing is really, again, focusing this color immensely on just those raised bumps on his flesh and the spine. I want those to look like glowing embers in his skin, and I really, really like the way that this turns out. And we can move on to the Juggernaut himself. Next, I want to go ahead and work on the Juggernaut.
Bitch!
All right.
Yeah, 10-year-old memes! Yeah!
What we're going to do is we're going to work with two specific metallic color tones, first of which is going to be some Lead Belcher. This is going to go on the underside of the creature to represent his metal flesh. And I really like how this works. It's just a really rich, deep iron color tone. After that's done, we're going to come back in with some Retributor Gold, and this is going to be all the trim on that red armor. And oh boy, do I love this color against some Blood Angel's red armor. It just looks so bright and vivid. Now this takes a little bit of time just because there is a lot of trim, and I also want to make sure to get this on the hilt of the sword to add some emphasis there, but the end results look amazing, and now we can work on some of those details. Let's go ahead and finish this model up so we can start working on his base. And there's only a couple things we have left to do. First, I want to wash the entirety of the Juggernaut in Nuln Oil once more. This is going to help make everything look a little bit grimier, a little dirtier, a little sootier, which I think works perfectly for Khorne. But I want to call out that I'm not putting this on the bloodletter himself, the sword's blade. None of that gets this color because I don't want to mute those color tones at all. I really want them to look like they're glowing against everything else. Once the Nuln Oil wash is dried, we're going to come back in for a couple of detail colors. First, we're going to pull back out Imperial Yellow. We're going to apply this to the Juggernaut's eye as well as the bloodletter's eyes. Then we're going to come in with some Black Templar. Now what I'm using the Black Templar for is on the horns of the bloodletter, on his claws, and then also to pull out a little bit of details in the Juggernaut's legs. I really just wanted to add a little bit more of a soot, grimy look to this, and this works perfectly. I am so pleased with how this guy is coming out. So now I need to nail the base. And what I want to do for that is actually work with a lava base. Now I have tried this before and had a little bit of a failure, so I'm going to try to avoid those mistakes this time. The first thing that I'm going to do is paint the entirety of the base in Khorne red. Now, retrospectively, I actually think I should have done this in the same Wild Rider red that I'd used previously and just stuck with those same 3 colors. That's not what I did here, and I still think the effect looks good, but I feel like I can improve it in the future. So once the Khorne red has had time to dry, we are going to come back in with Wild Rider's red and start making some sort of zigzag patterns on the base. It doesn't really matter where you put these, you can adjust them as you want to, but the idea here is to create a haphazard pattern of a couple of different warm color tones to be a lava effect beneath the texture paint we're putting over top of it. Now the final color that I'm going to be using to help create this lava effect is once again Uriel Yellow. Again, I'm going to put it in sort of zigzag pattern, enhancing colors in some places, we're muting them in others, and just letting it be a little bit varied. Once this has had time to fully dry, I give it like a full 12 hours to dry because last time I didn't. I put my texture paint on way too quick and it absorbed all of the paint up and created a really ugly but coverable pattern, and I'm trying to avoid this time. So once it's dried, we come back in with some Mordant Earth. This is a lovely black texture paint from Games Workshop that as it dries crackles, and I'm hoping this is going to look like a lava surface with fresh lava beneath it. I apply this liberally to the base and we give it some more time to dry. It looks stunning. I absolutely love the way the textures are looking, but I'm actually looking at the model and I'm noticing that the Juggernaut's armor isn't quite standing out as brightly or vividly as I wanted to. So I'm going to take a brief moment here to come back in with some more, I almost called it Balthazar's gold, but I was using Retributor armor and a dry brush this over top all of that gold trim. Being really delicate to try not to get this color anywhere else, but this helps brighten everything back up, and now he's got the very subtlest of shines and it's perfect. Now all I need to do is grab some of my Gamergraph tufts. I grabbed 2 in particular, one that has a red-yellow mix and one that is a nice dark orange that sort of, or not orange, but brown, that sort of makes it look like burnt earth, and apply that to the base and we can take a look at the final model. Blood for the blood god, indeed.
Skulls for the skull throne!
Well, your skull was added to the skull throne, but this is the blood that I'm offering to the blood god, and I absolutely love this blood letter. He glows brilliantly against what I did with the Juggernaut. I'm so happy. I often get asked on this channel and just in comments of what is my favorite thing that I've painted, and for a long time, it was Abaddon. It's now this Juggernaut, because I got to do a lot of the similar effects, but I think the Grisaille, honestly, just stepped this thing up so much more than I was expecting. I've never gotten the effect looking this good, and I find that the combination of the Grisaille technique combined with contrast paints and then with the complement of true metallics that I feel like Khorne just needs, it looks so good. It was so fun to paint. It really didn't actually take that much time. The biggest thing that I was waiting on was mostly dry times for some of the Nuln Oil washes, but otherwise it went so fast, and I cannot wait to paint more Khorne demons up because I think I'm going to in my off time. Now, if you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to let me know down in the comments below. And like I said, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss behind the scenes content when I go live streaming. Now, before I head out, I do want to give a huge thank you to my patrons for making it so content like this can continue to happen. Without your guys' support, we would not be doing this, so thank you very, very much. Wait, if I killed you at the beginning of the video, how are you still here?
Oh, that's very, very simple. For you see, I am Legion. Yep. Legion.
This week, it's going to be the highly anticipated painting video of the Panzer 38T. That's right, I have seen your comments, I have heard your cries, and I'm finally going to be painting it up, which is why we've come back to Hobbies Unlimited. Because you see, I need some hobby supplies, so let's take a look around and find what I need to paint up this Panzer. Now, before I start to getting those supplies that I need to paint up this tank, I want to talk about something that I actually learned in the comments from a lot of you telling me that the Panzer tank that I built was actually not part of the Panzer line. It's actually a Czechoslovakian tank called the 38T, And it was adopted by the Germans when they annexed Czechoslovakia in 1939. So we're gonna go ahead and actually find some paints that's a little bit more akin to the 38T's original color scheme, which actually leans a little bit of a dark blue, and I am very excited about that. So let's head over to the spray paint section and now look for the paints that I need. They have Tamiya color. I actually am not used to being able to buy Tamiya colors, which is very exciting, and I have been looking through these. There's a lot of options, but I'm specifically looking for a little bit of a darker blue, and I think I found one. This one right here. I think this navy blue color tone is exactly what I'm looking for my 38T. However, I want to do a little bit of testing when we get home before I fully decide what I'm going to be doing on this tank. So I'm going to grab actually Gunship Gray as well.
And the other color you got, just for those of you who are paying attention at home.
Absolutely. And then the other one that I want to get, is German Gray, which is right here. I don't think I'll end up using this one on the tank, but I still want to have it because I do plan on getting an actual Panzer, and I want to paint it up properly. So these are the three paints I think I'm going to leave with today. Now I need to do a little bit of other shopping because there's some models over here that I was looking at for some of the like sci-fi models that has me very intrigued. We're back over here in the section with the Star Wars products, and we can see my beautiful Bad Batch vehicle here. But no, that's not what we're here to look at today. I actually am considering this Imperial TIE Fighter, but then I saw this. The Interceptor. I was looking at this through the screen and I could not read that. That does say Interceptor. Okay, for some reason the C looks like a G to me, but this is the Return of the Jedi Interceptor. I really like this vehicle. I think the ship is amazing. So I definitely think I have to pick this one up, but there's a lot of really cool stuff here. And like, look at this. It's just the engine. Like, you could just build a prop jet engine, which is really cool, and I kind of want to do that. I kind of want to try that. Is this also an engine? This is also just like an engine. That is so cool. Oh, and these are STEM. That's fantastic. I love that they have these here along with their military models, and just look how cool some of these are. Like, what? These are so amazing. I really, really like the look. Is that a dragon? Is that just a dragon? That's just a dragon. Okay, well, you know what? Sometimes you see fantasy stuff when you're looking for military models and sci-fi things, and that's what we found. I also, okay, so we've got a bunch of like additional planes and everything here, which is very, very cool. But I noticed on this one, Batmobiles. Love the Batman stuff. Love some of these older art pieces. I think, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but didn't this artist do stuff for, what was it called? Heavy Metal? Like, wasn't that something that they worked on? I feel like it was. And then, oh my God, Wacky Racers. Whoa. I haven't thought about Wacky Racers in forever. The Mean Machine, and then what's the other one they have? The Compact Pussycat. Amazing. These are so cool. There's a lot of great things. Now, something else that I just want to briefly show you guys before we get back to actually painting our tank is some of the cool train models that they have back here. Because they have them out open and on display, and I just thought they were really, really cool. Like, there's so much interesting detail on these, and I've never dealt with trains at all. Like, this is something completely outside my wheelhouse, but I do think they are beautiful, and there's a lot of like other cool vehicles with it. Look at that gold one. Holy moly. I really, oh, wow, this is so cool. I love that custom paint job. It's so angry. I love when they do this on tanks. That is so amazing. I just love coming to this store so much. There's just constantly rad things to look at. But we should probably head home to start working on this tank. When I got back home, I wanted to test the 3 primers that I picked up at Hobbies Unlimited. This test is for 2 reasons. One, I wanted to just give the Tamiya color a try. I've never used it before, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't accidentally like over prime my tank or something, because I never had used the paint before, so that's one of the reasons for the test. The other main reason for the test is because I need to see exactly how these colors were going to dry once they were on plastic, because it's not always one-to-one with what the cap colors show
on the bottles. And I'm really glad that I did this because ultimately, after looking at the three, I decided to go with the more neutral of the color tones, German gray. The reason I did this is because I wasn't actually sure I'd have enough colors within my paint collection to bring out some of the lighter blue color tones that I would want on the tank with the dark blue primer. So I went with the neutral gray because I knew I can make that darker and then build back some of those light color tones a bit easier. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, probably should have had some gloves on.
Hey guys, I just wanted to jump into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, especially if you're enjoying the content that you find here. And if you're into the spicier side of the hobby, well, my Only Fanatics VIP page is currently 50% off through the end of the month for new subscribers. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, use the link in the video description below, and I hope to see you there. Now let's go ahead and get back to the video. With the tank now primed, we can start actually applying some of that blue color tone that I've seen in a lot of the reference material that I looked up when I was doing research on the Panzer 38T. And in order to achieve that dark blue color tone, I'm gonna use Drakenhof Nightshade, a shade color tone from Citadel, which I absolutely love. Now, it takes a little bit of time to get this shade fully applied to the entirety of this model, but it's okay because I had chat to keep me company. And when I was done, I was really happy because it was very much matching what I was seeing in my reference. But I didn't want to just stop there. I wanted to start adding a little bit of texture and weathering to this model before we even get to our weathering powders. In order to do that, I pulled out two other paints that I picked up at Hobbies Unlimited. The first one is IJN Gray. This is a light blue gray that I really, really like, and we're going to dry brush this on to pretty much all of the edges of this tank. I want to focus on the edges specifically because I figured that's where rocks and other chipping might occur on the paint, and it might be maintained a little bit less. Once I was satisfied with how that was looking, I decided to come back in with one more lighter color tone called Royal Light Gray. This is another Tamiya color and I really like it. It's a little bit more yellow and it added just a nice subtle highlight to everything I'd already done to further that chipping effect. Then once I was finished with that, there was only a couple more things that I needed to do. Mainly, I wanted to take care of the straps on the Jerry tanks. I wanted those to be in a leather color tone, so I reprimed them in Wraithbone and then used a little bit of snakebite leather over top of them to get that warm leather color. Off stream, I was looking at the tank, and before we got to the weathering, I decided that I wanted to put a little bit of Nuln Oil on all of the treads because they were just blending in too much with the rest of the tank. And I know that's kind of historical, like they really didn't seem to differentiate the tread color necessarily from the rest of the hull color, but it bothered me a little bit. So I put a little bit of Nuln Oil on all the treads and on the machine guns sticking out of the tank because again, I wanted them to just have a little bit of a different color tone, and I figured the Nuln Oil would also just benefit as looking like soot or debris that had built up on the used machine. And I think it worked really well, and now we can actually get to the weathering step. It's time to work with the Tamiya weathering powders, and I have to say that ever since I started using these things, I absolutely love them. Now, I kind of go a bit crazy with how I approach this, but I do have a plan, so let me tell you what my plan was, and then if you really want to see the full just craziness that was applying all of the powders, you can check out the live stream after this video because it's still up and you can watch it. But the idea was to start with my darker color tones first, then work into some of the metallics to do a little bit of chipping work, and then finally we would focus some rust in very specific areas. Now, my idea for this tank, as I've mentioned, is I really want it to make it feel like it has been used, but it is in fact old, but very, very well maintained by its tank crew. So in order to do that, I really want to limit how much rust we're putting on the tank, but I do want it to look stained and like it's covered in soot because the guns have actually been fired, it's been rolling around, and we'll do some dirt buildup later to further this effect. But we're gonna start with the powders, and we're going to use the soot and the oil stained colors first. And we're gonna do kind of an overall dusting of these colors on the majority of the tank. Then once we're done with that, to add a little bit of a chipping effect, we're gonna come in with some of the metallic powders and do that predominantly on the bottom portion of the tank, mostly where you'd expect rocks to maybe get kicked up and hit the paint, chipping off pieces of it so that the raw metal would actually be exposed. Finally, once I'm done with that and I'm feeling satisfied about it, I come back in with the rust color tone. Now, as I mentioned, I really want this to be focused, and the main place where I thought there might be rust would be around the exhaust, because that's where a lot of heat and potentially moisture are going to be doing damage. And even though the tank might be maintained by its tank crew, that's probably where they're least likely able to maintain that paint coating to help prevent the rusting, just because it's getting so hot and it's being used so much. So we're gonna focus the rust there. And overall, I'm really, really happy with how this is looking, but we need to make this tank dirtier. She's still going out there into the mud, trolling around, and I really want her to look dirty. So that's what we're gonna do next. The last step is to add some dirt to this tank. And for this, I decided to pick up something new that I've never used before, the AK splatter effects, specifically the one called Dirt. And I really, really like it, although I will admit that once it dries, it's very flat looking, not in texture. It had plenty of texture and I loved that. That's why I ended up layering it up quite a bit on my tank. But in regards to color, it ended up being very flat. So I had the brilliant idea of coming back in with my weathering powders once I was happy with how much I had built up on the underside of the hull, onto the treads itself, and up to the sides of the tank. I came back in with the weathering powders, grabbed some of the lighter ones that were meant for sand and dirt, and dry brushed that onto the dried dirt effects that I'd used from AK. And it worked perfectly. I absolutely love the effect. And with that, we can actually look at the final results. Pew, 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 pew. I know that's probably not exactly how rapidly this thing could fire, but I am so happy with how well my little tank turned out. I honestly don't know why it took me so long to gather the courage to actually paint one of my scale models. It really was just like painting one of my Warhammer tanks, and I kind of expected that going in, but I still was very nervous. No more. I'm going to paint so many more scale models because I really, really enjoyed it. And I'm super, super satisfied with how my 38T turned out. I've never tried to make something historical before. And while I know I'm not 100% accurate, and I do still have some work that I could do on the tank, adding the
iron
cross, for example, maybe even adding more dirt effects. Like I have been considering going back out to my local game store, grabbing some more AK splatter effects of different types and going back in on another live stream and doing some more work on it. But we'll have to save that for the future. But overall, I am very pleased with how this tank turned out. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are on it down below in the comments. What do you like that I did on it? What maybe that you're dissatisfied with? What could I do different the next time? Now, before I head out, I do want to give a huge thank you to my patrons for making it so content like this can continue to happen. Without your guys' support, we just would not be doing this. So thank you very, very much. I have been Angela, and I hope you have a wonderful hobby night. Thanks to the mind of Mini Wargaming Dave, my hive fleet is evolving. I'm going to be painting up one of the new miniatures in the upcoming Ravaged Star Gamefound campaign as published by Lazy Squire Games. My name is Angela, and welcome to Hobby Night. When Mini Wargaming Dave reached out to me asking if I would be interested in painting up one of the new models from the upcoming Gamefound campaign for his Ravaged Star wargame, I jumped at the opportunity because I was looking through the campaign and he's got two new factions that are coming out for the game. One of them is the Gorkog, which is a monstrous alien bug race, which is a perfect alternative for my Tyranids. Because you see, as I've dived into 10th edition Warhammer 40k, I've really gotten into the Tyranids. But I wasn't really satisfied with all of the new models we got from Games Workshop. And Dave has given me the perfect alternative for the Tyranid Prime, which was like my least favorite of all the GW models. We have Korvax the Bone Crusher. This bad boy is roughly the same size as a Tyranid Prime, and he's got a big, glorious spread wing pose, and that's exactly what I wanted for this particular model. So I asked Dave to send me Korvax so that I could paint him up in my Hive Fleet Maleficent color tone, which is a lot of purples and a lot of greens, which we're going to get into in just a moment. But if you want to see everything that is going to be on the new Ravaged Star Gamefound campaign, make sure to use the link that I've left in the video description below to check out all of the new models that are coming. The campaign will be starting soon on November 7th, so be looking forward to that arriving. Now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get painting. Mini Wargaming Dave was kind enough to send me an early copy of Korvax the Bonecrusher to paint up. And when he arrived, he was in fantastic condition, but because he was a 3D printed model still, there were some supports still left on the model. And I wanted to get rid of those before we got to painting. So I used a couple of clippers and nail files to clean him up as best as possible. And I'll admit, I always get super nervous doing this because I'm relatively heavy-handed, resin models are kind of delicate, and I always end up breaking something. But thankfully, I got through everything without breaking the model this time. Now, before we actually get him primed, I want to go take him and give him a little bit of a bubble bath. Because you see, I have found that whether it is a cast 3D resin model or a 3D printed resin model, there's always a little bit of a residue left on, either from the printing process or the casting process or whatever. And if you don't get rid of that, it can cause your paint to slide right off the model, even if it's been primed. And I want to avoid that problem when it comes to Korvax. So we're giving him the bubble bath, and then once he's dried, we're going to take him upstairs and prime him in Gray Sear, because that's the exact same color that I used on the rest of Hive Fleet Maleficent, and I want him to match as closely as possible. Now that my big alien bug is primed, we can actually start putting some color on him, and the first thing that we need to do is apply a nice, beautiful green to all of his squishy bits. And for this, I'm going to be using Mantis Warrior Green, which I am going to admit right off the bat, as much as I love the way that it looks, it's actually technically the wrong color. I was so ashamed when I finally realized this, and it didn't happen until much later in the painting process, so I just decided to go with it because it's close enough to the true green of Hive Fleet Maleficent, but I was supposed to use Striking Scorpion. I didn't. I had some orcs on the table, I was painting them, that is one of my orc color tones, and I just happened to grab it. But regardless, it actually blends in really well, and because Korvax is a male character, I figured it can just be the male color tone of the species, rather than the female one, which is the Striking Scorpion color tone. It works for me, I'm really happy with it, and the green is looking fantastic. But I did get some green in some places I don't want it, so I'm going to go back in with some Gray Sear and tidy everything up, especially on the wings and any of the armor pieces, because those are specifically going to be yellow and purple later on, and I don't want the green making anything look too brown. So after we get some cleanup done, we can move on to the rest of the colors. Hey guys, I just wanted to jump into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, especially if you're enjoying the content that you find here. And if you're into the spicier side of the hobby, well, my Only Fanatics VIP page is currently 50% off through the end of the month for new subscribers. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, use the link in the video description below, and I hope to see you there. Now let's go ahead and get back to the video. For all of the glorious armored carapace pieces on Korvax, I want to use Luxian Purple. I almost called it something different, but it is definitively Luxian Purple, and it's one of my all-time favorite new purple contrast colors. When Games Workshop came out with the new Contrast 2.0 line, I was super hyped because of how many different purple shades were being added to it, and Luxian is the standout to me. I try to use this on everything that I possibly can, and I definitely had to use it on my Tyranids because it looks stunning, especially in all of those grooves. And on Korvax, he's got just as many, and it looks great. Once I'm done getting the purple on all the appropriate places on the model, we're going to move on to using Iron Jaws Yellow. And for this, I'm going to use it on the leather of his wings. I love this yellow color tone as much as I love the purple color tone, and I think together with the green that I've used, it's a great combination and really makes my Hive Fleet stand out. Korvax the Bonecrusher is looking majestic, and we are down to just the details on him. So the first thing that I need to take care of is his mouth. He's got a big, open, screaming mouth, and I want to paint the inside of that with some Doomfire and magenta, just like I've done on the rest of my Hive Fleet. After that, we need to come to all the bones that he's got poking out of all of his little bits. And for that, we're going to be using Skeleton Horde. It's sort of my go-to for bones, and it works perfectly here. We're going to get this on all the spikes, on his toes, all his claws and his teeth, everything that might need it. Finally, the last thing that I really need to add to the model is a wash using Reikland Fleshshade, and this is specifically going to go on everything that we did up in yellow. The spikes on his wings, the leather of his wings, all of it's going to get a nice wash of Reikland Fleshshade just to add a little bit more depth to those recesses. We are down to just the base, and for this I have my actual biggest regret of the entire project, because you see, normally when I'm working on these kinds of projects, I like to work for the most recessed part of the miniature outwards, and I thought that was the skin. That's why I started with it originally. But it turns out it's actually the base, and I'm using black on the base, Black Templar specifically. I've already painted all his toes and feet and pretty much everything else. So we're gonna have to be really, really careful when applying this color so that we don't end up getting it on too much of the things that we've already painted. This is why I think I should have painted it first. It would have just solved me a lot of headache, I think, but it's okay. We get it done, it ends up looking great, and then I need to go back in with a little bit of a cleanup step. We're gonna be using Gray Seer one more time and cleaning up all the corruption that you see slithering along the base. I really almost consider leaving it painted in Gray Seer because I really like the strikingness of the white color tone against the darker black color tone of everything that I've painted so far, but we need to keep it matching High Fleet Maleficent, which means that the corruption is going to end up actually painted in Luxian purple. This, I think, is still quite striking, but maybe not quite as much as the black and white color scheme as before. Regardless, I'm really happy with how things are looking, and the last thing that we need to do is get the base that I'm going to mount him onto painted up in black, get him glued onto that base using a little bit of Zap-A-Gap because he's a resin model and my Tamiya paints, or not paints, but glue won't work on him. Then once he's dried and I feel like he's secure on that base, we're going to apply a little bit of Mordant Earth around the little ring that's left over from where he doesn't quite go to the edge of the existing base I've mounted him to. This will just help blend everything in, give us a little bit of a crackle effect to sort of continue the effect that we already have on the painted base. And I absolutely love the look of him, and we can finally look at the final model. And here he is, Khorne the Bone Crusher. Well, you might only be seeing part of him because he might be green screening out, so let me go ahead and take him off screen and talk about how awesome this model was to paint, how grateful I am to Dave for sending it to me and sponsoring today's episode so that I was allowed to paint it. And honestly, he's gonna be a perfect addition to High Fleet Maleficent. It's exactly the pose that I had hoped for Tyranid Prime, and he's the exact scale, so it fits just absolutely perfectly. Thank you, Dave, for sending this my way. Now, if you guys want to check out everything that's going to become available in the upcoming Ravage Star Game Found campaign, do be sure to use the link that I've left in the video description below to check everything out. There's a lot of really cool new models, 2 new factions that are being added to it, which Khorne is part of one of them, and you can explore everything that becomes available. The campaign is going to be starting very soon, so if you want to get your hands on these models, maybe expand your own collection or just find some other alternatives for your Games Workshop models, Ravage Star is the place to look. Thank you once again to Dave and Lazy Squire Games for sponsoring today's episode. And before I head out, I do want to give one final thank you to my patrons for making it so content like this can continue to happen. Without your guys' support, we just would not be doing this, so thank you very, very much. I have been Angela, and I hope you have a wonderful hobby night. Today, I'm going to be painting up my favorite Night Sister and former apprentice to Count Dooku, Asajj Ventress, as brought to you by Damian Saber. More on them later in the episode. My name is Angela, and welcome to Hobby Night. Oh, sorry. I haven't been able to stop playing with this since I got it. You see, when Damian Saber reached out to me and was like, hey, we'd like to sponsor an episode and also send you a lightsaber, I jumped at the opportunity and knew exactly who I wanted to paint for this tutorial. None other than one of my favorite Clone Wars characters, Asajj Ventress. The only question I have now is which Asajj Ventress should I paint? Because you see, I have one from both Shatterpoint and Star Wars Legion. But which one should I actually paint? Shatterpoints? Legions? Shatterpoints? Legions?
Why not both?
You know what? Chaos Cultist makes a great point. Why don't I just paint both? And in fact, I think that's exactly what I'm going to do. So without further ado, let's paint Asajj Ventress from both Star Wars Shatterpoint and Star Wars Legion. The first thing that I need to do before we can get to work on either of our miniatures is make sure that they're both primed. So I headed upstairs to my porch and made sure to get them primed up using Gray Seer. Once that was done, we can take them back down to the hobby room and get to working on these miniatures. Now, before I get started, I was actually debating where should I begin on these models, because there's no really recessed area. So ultimately, I decided to work on the darkest color tones first, which means that we're gonna be working with a ton of purples. And I know this probably should come as no surprise, because 1, Ventress is wearing a lot of purples, and 2, it's me. Why do you think I chose her? She's wearing a lot of purples. Anyways, the first color that we need to work with is Leviathan Purple. Now this is a contrast purple color tone that I absolutely love, but I always forget that it dries super, super flat. So after I've got it put down on both the skirt and her top on both of the models, I'm looking at it going, it's not doing quite what I wanted it to do. So I'm going to turn to my savior, Lord Duncan, because I remembered I have his 2 Thin Coats line of paints. And in those 2 Thin Coat line of paints are a couple of really gorgeous purples that I've sort of played around with a little bit, but haven't messed around with too much. And I think this is a perfect opportunity. And the first one we're going to work with is Sorcerer's Cloak. This is a really lovely mid-tone purple that blends in with Leviathan Purple super well. So we're gonna apply this to both models with a heavy dry brush on all the things that we painted purple already. Then once I'm satisfied with how that's looking, and gosh darn it, it's already improving the look of these outfits so much, I do want to come back in with one final lighter highlight color to really emphasize those folds, especially on the skirt. And to do that, we're going to come back in with Runic Purple. This is again another of the 2 Thin Coats line, and it's a slightly lighter color tone than what we used previously, and it blends in beautifully again with all the colors we've worked with already. I love the way the skirts are looking. I think doing this dry brushing technique worked beautifully, and I'm going to be using this combination of 3 colors going forward a lot more because Leviathan Purple is just so deep and rich, but it needs those highlights, and I think I found the perfect highlight colors. Now, the last thing that I want to work on purple-wise is the loincloth. For this, we're going to be using Magos Purple, which is a much more reddish purple color tone, perfect to match the character model of Ventress from the Clone Wars series. And once we have that down, we can start doing a little bit of cleanup. And now a word from today's sponsor, Damien Saber, the makers of this wonderful lightsaber that you've been seeing me wield throughout today's episode. And I have to admit, I've absolutely loved playing with this thing ever since I got it. It has a huge variety of color options for the blade, the hilt makes a variety of fun sounds, and it's all changeable by the push of a button, which is super easy to use, and it's absolutely just so cool to play with. If you've ever wanted to get a lightsaber for yourself and want to check out the various hilt designs that they have available on their website, I've left a link to it down in the video description below, and I highly encourage you to check out Damien Saber to see if you can find your perfect lightsaber. This particular one is from Revan, but they have a huge variety of other characters available, and I would highly encourage you to check them out. Thank you once again to Damien Saber for sponsoring today's episode. Now let's go ahead and get back to painting. I am absolutely loving how the purple of her outfit has turned out, but I did get a lot of purple in a lot of places that I don't want it. So we're going to take some time now to do a very short cleanup step, which is predominantly going to involve using some Gray Seer on the wraps on her torso, on her arms, as well as the belt that's around her waist. Now you might be going, Angela, aren't you forgetting all the flesh tone that you need to clean up as well? Well, don't worry, because I didn't see the need to use Gray Seer on it when I was just going to be using an opaque base color tone next on the flesh, which is specifically going to be called Opal Skin. This is a really lovely flesh tone, very pale, very slightly pinky from the Army Painter, and I think it works perfect for Ventress. We're gonna put this down on all of her face, her hands, everything where you see flesh exposed, which really isn't that many areas, but also her back. I just wanna say, I love the muscle details they put on both sculpts on her back. It's just so good. I absolutely love it. I'm getting sidetracked though, because once we have Opal Skin down, I wanna come back in with Dreadful Visage. We're going to use this as a shade over all of the flesh, but I'm also going to put this on all of the wraps as well, because if you look at the art for Ventress, on those wraps, they tend to have a mix of sort of a purpley blue color tone. So I figured Dreadful Visage would be good as a base, and then we'll put some blues over top it next. but I'm still working on her skin. And I noticed something after Dreadful Visage had dried, especially on her head. That beautiful bald head of hers. It had sort of dried a little bit splotchy. So to help smooth that up and to emphasize some details on her face and hands, we're gonna come back in with a dry brush using Opal Skin one more time. This works beautifully. It adds a little bit of highlight back to her face, really helps her eyes pop a lot, and it smooths out that head where it had some splotchiness. I'm loving the way this is looking, and now we can move on to the details. Speaking of those details, we can move on to those next. And we're gonna come back immediately to those wraps because I wanted to add a little bit of a blue tint to them. And how I'm going to do that is using Apothecary White. Over top the Dreadful Visage, this does exactly what I want. It gives me that very subtle blue tint while still having a little bit of that purple shine through. And now it looks very on model in my opinion. Then we need to come back in with a little bit of Soul Blight Gravelord for the belt. This is going to just be a lovely sort of soft white color tone because honestly, Ventress's color tone entirely is a bunch of purples and whites and various mixes of those with very other little colors in there except for the saber and that loincloth. Speaking of the loincloth, we need to focus on that a little bit and add the gold coloring to it. Because you see there's a beautiful pattern on there and that is going to be done up in greedy gold. This goes very smoothly and I love how it pops against that slightly reddish tint of the Magos purple. The next step is to work on the hilt of her saber. Now she has some unique lightsabers, and I really like the fact that she actually has curved sabers gifted to her by Count Dooku, who she obviously apprenticed to. I love Dooku's sabers, I love Asajj's sabers. Let's actually get them painted. So the first step I need to do is pull out some Black Legion and apply this to the entirety of both sabers' hilts. Then we're gonna come back in using some sterling silver and do a nice pattern on here with this little stripe pattern, because that's what Asajj Ventress's sabers look like. And I will say, this is where I noticed the biggest difference between both the Shatterpoint miniature and the Legion miniature, because the Legion miniature actually made painting the stripes a lot easier. It was actually sort of bulbous and they had a dip where the black would be. And I think that made it really, really simple to paint. Whereas the Shatterpoint miniature, which I think is a little bit more accurate to the actual saber hilt itself, was a lot smoother. So painting the little ring of silver was a little bit more challenging because I didn't really have something to help guide me around that. But I think they both turned out great. And then the last thing that I needed to do before we move on to the blade of the saber is to apply a small Nuln Oil wash to the entire thing, just to help mute that silver slightly, re-deepen the blacks, and smooth everything over. Hey guys, just jumping into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button and bell icon for notifications so you never miss future content on the channel. And if you're into the spicier side of the hobby, you can find a link to my OnlyFanatics down in the link tree below in the description. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the video. We're finally down to painting the Sith red blade of her lightsaber. And for this, I want to base coat it first in a pure white. That way, the Blood Angels red that I put on next will stand out as brightly as possible. Now, in the previous Star Wars painting tutorials that I've done, when I've gotten to the sabers, I've had a little bit of a white highlight to try to give a glow effect. And while I think that works really well on the green and blue sabers, I don't think it actually looks that great on the red sabers that I've done. I just haven't figured out how to get it to look quite right. So I'm gonna try something a little bit different this time. Instead of going with a pure white highlight, I'm going to first start with a highlight using Wild Rider Red. This is something that I've done on some of my other tutorials where I've gone into a red, yellow, orange color tone. And I think we're gonna do a little bit of a similar thing here. So once the Wild Rider Red is down, we're gonna add a little bit of white gradually into Wild Rider Red and just keep layering on until I'm satisfied with the glow effect. It's a bit more subtle than what I get with the pure white, but I think it looks so much better and it just makes them actually look like they do in the movies because the red sabers don't glow quite as crisply as some of those other color tones. And I love how Asajj has turned out. And now all we need to do is work on the base. Technically, there's only one base that I need to paint because I already painted the Shatterpoint ones back when I did the rest of my Shatterpoint miniatures.
Excuse me, I painted that base, thank you.
Okay, yes, technically the Chaos Cultist painted the base, so if you really like the way my Shatterpoint Asajj Ventress's base look, that is because of the Chaos Cultist. But I need to deal with the Legion base, and I'm gonna make this match the rest of my Legion miniatures, which is pretty simple. First, I'm going to put just a brown base coat on the base to help the texture paint that I'm going to use next stick a little bit better. And that texture paint that I'm going to be using is Armageddon Dust. It's kind of my go-to. I use it on a lot of my models. I just really like it. I think it's very flexible and easy to manipulate. So once the Armageddon Dust is down and it's dried and it's looking lovely, we're going to put an Agrass Earthshade wash over top of it very heavily. I really want this to be kind of like dark. Once that has thoroughly dried, we're gonna come back in with a Wraithbone dry brush. This is, again, to help it match the rest of my Legion miniatures. It gives it a very nice sort of dry, sort of sandy limestone look. I don't know, I really, really like the look of this base. And once that is dry, we can glue both of the models down to their respective bases and then take a look at the final product. And here they are, both of my Asajj Ventress models, one from Shatterpoint and the other from Star Wars Legion. And honestly, I think both models are fantastic. There were some very minor differences between them, predominantly in the hilt of the actual lightsaber itself. But other than that, I think they're both fantastic. I'm really glad that I have them both now painted up. And I'm really glad that I discovered such an awesome combination of purples for fabric going forward, because gosh darn, do I love what I did on her skirt. Both of them. I think both of them look absolutely stunning. Now, before I head out, I do want to give a huge thank you to Damian Saber for sponsoring today's episode. Remember that if you want to check out the lightsabers that they have available, you can use the link that I've left in the video description below to check out all the various options that they have, including Ventress's, Luke Skywalker, Kanan Jarrus, which is one of my all-time favorites. There's a whole huge selection to choose from, so do be sure to check them out. And thank you once again for sending me this awesome lightsaber, as well as sponsoring today's episode, Damian Saber. And I do want to give one final shout out to my patrons as well for also helping keep this content going. You guys' support is awesome, and I absolutely would not be doing this without you guys, so thank you very, very much. And I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful hobby night. I've been Angela, and I'll see y'all next time. Today, I'm going to be preparing a fierce warrior to take on carnivorous trees in Oathsworn into the Deepwood. My name's Angela, and welcome to Hobby Night. You guys know me. I'm a huge fan of adventure, campaign-driven board games. So when Shadowborn Games reached out to me and was like, hey, we'd like to send you Oathsworn and see what you think of it, I was like, yes, please send it my way, because this thing looks super cool. Not only does it have a ton of miniatures, as you can see, that come in a lot of very big boxes, it also has terrain, which I thought was really cool. So like we get figures, we get terrain, and then all of the miniatures for the heroes are modular, which I've never seen a board game do before. And I think this is a really cool feature. And it even ties into the mechanics of the game, which I think is even more brilliant. But we are going to be working today on one of the characters that I'm going to be using in my own personal Oathsworn campaign. And that is the War Bear. That's right. We're going to be painting a big fluffy bear, but she is wearing armor and she has a big axe. But I don't want to just paint up one of her weapons. I want to paint up multiple of them. So I also picked out one other weapon choice, and we're going to be painting up both today. We'll showcase both on her, and I just think this is super, super cool. So without further ado, let's get to painting. I want to go with an icy blue color scheme for this model. So to get us started, we're going to prime everything up using Gracier, which has a nice blue undertone. Once I'm happy with that, we're going to bring her down to the hobby desk and start with a grisaille technique on the entire model, or more commonly called slap chop when referring to miniatures. Now, this is basically going to establish some nice shadows, midtones, and highlights for me before I even put any additional contrast paint on the figure. And to start, I want to stick with the blue color scheme. So we're going to go with Drakenhof Nightshade, a really lovely dark blue wash. We're going to apply this liberally to the entire model. Once that has dried thoroughly, we're going to move into some dry brushing to bring out some midtones and highlights. And the first color I want to start with dry brushing is called Gravestone Blue. This is one from the Two Thin Coats line from Duncan Rhodes, and I really like it because it's a very soft,
subtle blue-gray color tone. And this is perfect because I'm going to emphasize this on the armor, and we're not going to do as much highlighting when we get to that armor. But with the fur, we're gonna come back in with a third highlight color, specifically White Star. This is a really beautiful, bright white color tone, and we're going to apply this to all the fur, to the leathers, a little bit to the armor, but only very subtly, just to bring out some minor highlights. We're actually gonna come back in with some traditional layering using the same white color tone, focusing on her fur, because I really want the polar bear to look like a polar bear. I want that fur to be bright white and beautiful in contrast to everything else that I'm doing, so we get this really beautiful icy vibe to everything. And I really love how this turns out, and now we can start applying some other colors. I am so happy with how she is looking. The fur stands out beautifully and everything else has a very just lovely highlight, midtone, and shade. So let's actually put some colors on these. Now I do want to go with a little bit of warmth when it comes to the leathers. So for that, I'm going to go with Dark Oath Flesh. This is one of my favorite leather tones from Contrast Line. It works perfectly, has a very subtle red undertone, and I think it actually blends with the blue grays that I've put as my base perfectly. Once I'm happy with all the leather straps on her chest, on her armor, anything on her weapons, we're gonna move on to that cloak that she has on her waist. This I'm going to be doing up with Eldari Emerald. I really debated what I was going to do. I debated doing maybe more of a red, maybe a blue, maybe even a purple, but ultimately decided on green because while I want her to feel wintry, I didn't want her to feel Christmassy specifically. And I think this is a beautiful, beautiful balance of feeling sort of wintry without being Christmassy, but maybe still giving you a little bit of those vibes because I'm in the season. I'm very excited about this. So once we have that down, we can actually start moving on to the armor, and this is where we're gonna start having some fun.
Hey guys, just jumping into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button and bell icon for notifications so you never miss future content on the channel. And if you're into the spicier side of the hobby, you can find a link to my Only Fanatics down in the link tree below in the description. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the video.
Let's work on the armor because my whole idea and the reason that I picked the polar bear was because I wanted to go with this icy vibe and I wanted the armor to look like black ice because what's scary about winter? Black ice on the streets. So in order to achieve this, I found fairy dust as part of my Army Painter collection of paints, and this is an iridescent white color tone. When thinned and glazed over top of the blue-gray color that I've already put on the armor, it creates a very icy, iridescent, almost black ice looking feel. At least that's how I feel about it, and I love the look of this. But as I'm applying this color to the axe, as well as some of the other armor pieces, I'm noticing it's starting to blend in a little bit too much with itself. So there's a couple of like studs, as well as a couple other elements on the model that I think should be in a different color tone, but still metallic. So we're going to go with natural steel for this. This is gonna go on a lot of the pieces on her chest, those studs on her armor, as well as the claws as her secondary weapons. Because while I did like them kind of looking icy like the armor, it again was just blending in way too much and it needed to stand out a bit differently. So the steel color tone, which still has a little bit of a blue undertone, worked perfectly. I'm really happy with how things are turning out, but I'm looking at the axe head and I'm not satisfied. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna come back in with Dragonhof Nightshade one more time and apply this to the entirety of the axe head. This does wonders and I'm really liking where we're going with this. But now I wanna apply an overall Nuln Oil wash to pretty much everything I've already painted, with the exception of the fur, as well as the loincloth around her waist. Those I wanna keep a little bit brighter and keep a little truer to their original color, but everything else needs this Nuln Oil wash. And I love what this does to the armor. It finishes it off really nicely and really starts to make it look like black ice, or at least in my opinion. It also has helped the axe head a lot, but there's still something missing. So I ultimately come back in with filigree silver and apply that to the sharp edge of the axe. This enhances it exactly how I wanted it to, and now I feel like the axe is finished. But before we can move on to the base, I realized I almost forgot to paint the inside of the bear's mouth. She does have a big open screaming maw, and of course we need to apply some Sigfold Burgundy inside there to just round it off, make everything feel complete before we can move on to the base.
We're down to just the base, and the first thing that we need to take care of are her toenails, because I realize that she's got these little claws and I want them to be painted up using Black Templar. With that complete, we can actually start bringing out some of the other details that are on this really nicely sculpted base that we came with the Oathsworn miniatures. And you see that tree root that's there? We're gonna go with two different brown tones on this. One mid-tone brown and then a lighter brown as a highlight. The lighter brown will be dry brushed on, and I think this works perfectly. You can of course use whatever browns you want that might be appropriate to what you're using on the terrain, because that's what I tried to match, because we have been working on painting the terrain and it's coming along beautifully. Once that is down, there's a little pustule sort of growth on that root. We're going to paint that up using a bright yellow. Then we're going to move on to the dirt using Gargak Sewer to apply that to everything that is on the ground. Then I was noticing that the yellow of the pustule was standing out maybe a little bit too brightly, so I came back in with a Seraphim Sepia wash to sort of knock that color back a little bit. And I really like how this has blended it in with the root itself. The last thing that we need to take care of are the stones on the ground. We're gonna come back in with two gray color tones, one mid-tone gray and one lighter gray, to apply as a highlight afterwards. Then, with that complete, we can attach the model and now show you the final result. And here she is, my glorious warbear. And every time I look at that armor, I'm just so pleased, because I had a vision in my head when I saw her. I was like, ice armor, ice armor, ice armor, and I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I think I actually achieved ice armor in a way that I wasn't actually expecting to achieve it. Originally, I was thinking to do contrast with it, but I'm really happy I played around with the fairy dust, because I think it's just a really, really cool iridescent paint. And I love it, especially because you can mix it in with other paints and make them inherently iridescent, or do what I did and glaze it over top something that you've already painted. Regardless, it's cool. And what's also cool is the fact that Shadowborn Games sent me the all-in package for the Kickstarter. Thank you guys so much for that. It has been amazing, and I'm looking forward to playing the game. We've been prepping so much of the terrain, as well as a couple of the characters that we want to run in our first campaign. So I'm really looking forward to sharing that more with you guys on Instagram. If you yourself are interested in gigantic campaign-driven RPG-like board games, then I'd also encourage you to check out Oathsworn Into the Deepwood. It just has a lot of options. If you aren't into the miniatures, you don't even have to add those on. It does come with standees, which are perfectly acceptable to play the game with, but let's be honest, if you're watching this channel, you're probably a miniature fan, and you may want to get all that plastic goodness. And I personally think they did really well with those sculpts. And again, I am just blown away by the modularity of the hero characters and being able to switch out the weapons appropriate to whatever they're currently running in your campaign. That just is such a cool idea. I really hope other board games sort of take inspiration from that and maybe bring it into their games, because I just think it's a really nice element to especially these RPG campaigns. But overall, I'm just very, very happy with it. Before I head out, I do want to give a final thank you, not only to my patron members, but also my YouTube members, specifically Peter, because you're the first one. You took the plunge. Thank you, sir. And to all my patrons, thank you guys as well for supporting me, helping keep this content going and the channel running. Without you guys doing that, we just would not be here. So thank you very, very much. I have been Angela, and I hope you have a wonderful hobby night. What happens when an Ultramarine becomes obsessed with Sanguinalia? Well, I thought this holiday season we could find out together. My name's Angela, and welcome to Hobby Night. It's the holiday season, and I always like to do something festive on the channel around this time of year. And last year, I painted up the Red Gobbo, which is why this year I cannot repeat myself, even though I really do like the sculpt that Games Workshop came out with the new Red Gobbo design. So I went around and I looked through my entire Warhammer backlog, and I found a Space Marine that completely inspired me. So today, I'm going to turn this honor guard of the Ultramarines into Captain Kringus. When I found this poor Space Marine tucked away amongst my collection, he was already pre-primed in Gracier, which works perfectly for me. Although in hindsight, I do think priming him in white would have probably been a little bit of a better idea, but it's okay, we can work with the Gracier. Now I want to turn this boy into a Christmas dream, and the first step is to paint his armor up entirely in red. And I'm going to use a deep deep crimson color for this, Flesh Terror's red, and just make sure I get this color pretty much everywhere. We're gonna avoid the cloak as much as we can, but even if we get a little bit of red on that, it's not gonna be a big deal. We can do a cleanup step later. Once I am satisfied with how the red is looking, I wanna move on to the gold trim, and I'm going to be using Duncan Rhodes's Two Thin Coats Dragon's Gold color for this. It's a deep, rich gold, and I think it works perfectly with the red, and what is not Christmas except red and gold? It's super gaudy, looks really regal, and I think it's gonna be perfect for Captain Kringus. Now, we're going to focus on the pauldrons, on the Aquillas, and any of the other details like skulls that are on his armor. But there are some elements, like all of the Omegas all over his armor, that we're going to be avoiding because I have a different plan for that. The Omegas are exactly what inspired this entire project, and I want to do something dramatic with them. So we're going to avoid them for now and get everything else painted up in gold. Now, while this color scheme is predominantly going to consist of red, gold, obviously we've already painted those, as well as green and white, I do want to have a couple of natural color tones in there as well. And this was inspired by some of the designs I was looking up to put on his cape later. You see, I was looking up vintage holly designs and there was a lot of brown tones mixed in with the greens and reds, and I was like, you know what? This is a warrior. Let's make him still feel like a warrior and keep some of these elements in a natural leather color tone. So I'm going to paint his loincloth as well as the hilt of his sword up in a light tan color tone to sort of get rid of that red that we've already put down. Once I'm satisfied with how it's looking and it's pale enough, we're going to come back in with snakebite leather and really give it a chestnut vibe. I do really think, like, every time I saw this brown tone, I was just like, chestnut over open fire. And then I was like, no, that's near his balls. No! So that was where my brain went with that. I just thought you might enjoy it, but I really am satisfied with how the leather is looking. And we need to move on to the white element of this color scheme. And oh boy, does this take a while because I need to clean up the cape, paint that entirely in white, and do all of the details that I didn't paint in gold up in white as well, because some of them are going to become green and the others are going to remain white. And I think this color scheme is really going to start coming together. So let's get to the wreath portion, which has inspired this entire design.
I mean, we're keeping that take just because of the balls thing.
Oh yeah. No, I knew what I was doing. Hey guys, just jumping into the video to remind you to hit that subscribe button and bell icon for notifications so you never miss future content on the channel. And if you're into the spicier side of the hobby, you can find a link to my Only Fanatics down in the link tree below in the description. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the video. I mentioned a wreath. You might be going, Angela, there's no wreath on this Marine. Oh, yes, there is, because you see that Ultramarine symbol on his shield? I am going to turn that into a glorious wreath. And I was actually very nervous about this, but this is what inspired this entire project. So I had to go with it. And I thought, what better way to go about it than painting it on stream with all of you in chat? And this actually went really, really well. So the first step that we ended up needing to do while I was talking with chat was get a deep green color tone onto all of the Ultramarine symbols. This goes for the ones that are hanging off his loincloth, the one on the shield, any symbols that might be scattered around his armor. We're gonna paint them in the deep forest green. Then I want to come back in with a variety of lighter green tones and start layering on little hash marks, especially on the U on the shield, to create a wreath color tone. This took a little while. I didn't always have the best colors to help them stand out against the darker color tone I had already put down, but eventually I mixed a light yellow green with a white and I got the perfect highlight and the wreath really started to come together. I went back and forth between my base color tone of the dark green and this lighter color tone that I had created and just blended it all together until I had a beautiful wreath on the front of the shield. I then took that lighter green color tone and went back over some of the other symbols on his armor to make sure there was a nice highlight there too, not going into quite as much detail with the hash marks, but wanting to still bring out some other tones there. This especially was really useful when I painted his eyes. I think these are the best Space Marine eyes I've ever painted, and I'm so happy with how they have turned out. The last thing that I was able to get done while on stream was finishing up a little bit of the detail work on the cloak. You see, I wanted it to still have a little bit of a shadowed effect, and so I used Holy White from the speed paint line from Army Painter to apply a wash over the entirety of the cloak and everything else that I had painted white, just to add a little bit of shadows in there. After the stream had ended and the Holy White paint had fully dried, I decided to come back in with a light white dry brush over the cloak. It was a little bit splotchy, things hadn't dried exactly how I wanted them to, and I still wanted it to be a more pure white color tone because I wanted it to look like fresh snow. So I think the dry brush really helped, and then after that, I was honestly not feeling the best about it. It did what I wanted, but not to the full extent. So I actually came back in and edge highlighted a portion of the cape, which then got me thinking, okay, if I'm gonna spend some time edge highlighting this white cape, I should also probably wash and highlight all the gold elements too to really help make those pop. I wanted to go the extra mile on this Marine, and I did not want to slack on anything. So I'm going to put a Reichland flesh shade over all of the gold elements, and then once that's dried, I'm gonna come back in and lightly dust over the exact same Dragon's Gold color tone I used before, just to bring that shimmer back a little bit. And now he's really starting to look like a Christmas dream, but we're not done. There are still some elements that I want to take care of. Specifically, I want to put a design on that cape, so let's do that next. I mentioned I had been inspired by some vintage Christmas designs that I wanted to put on the cape, and that is what we're going to focus on next. Specifically, I wanted to put a little holly design on the corner of the cape. And to do this, I was very nervous. I wasn't sure this was gonna come out very well, especially since I'm not used to really drawing on patterns to a billowing cape. But I figured this little corner element might be nice. So the first thing I need to do is dot on 2 berries in red. Use Blood Angel's red for this to help it stand out a little bit from the armor and just to be a little bit brighter. Then once I was satisfied with how they were looking, we're gonna come back in and draw on the leaf portions. And I figured the berries would give me a little bit of a guide of where the leaves should go up from. And this did work out really well. I used a deep green color tone, but again, not the same that I used on the wreath. This time I went with Orc Flesh. This is a little bit of a brighter, darker green color, and I think it works perfectly for holly leaves. Then I wanted to highlight them, just like I had done with the wreath. So I went back to that yellow-green color tone that I had used previously, did that first, and then mixed it with white one more time and added another layer of highlight just to really bring out some details on those leaves. After I was done with that, I was looking at the berries and I'm like, you know what? I want more than just 2 berries. I think it needs a third. So I apply 1 more berry and then I highlight each of those berries with a light red tone, just like I did the leaves so that they all look complementary together. The final element that is going to bring this Christmas Marine together is giving him a candy cane sword. It's already painted in red. I figured this would be an easy task, and honestly, this is really where I was inspired by Jessica Negri. She did a recent video where she was dressed as an angel and she had a candy cane sword that she converted, and I was like, you know what? That's exactly what I'm doing on this Marine. It was pretty simple. I drew on the foundation of some straight lines in white, filled those in, and then when I realized some of them were crooked, I came back in with the same red tone I had used on the sword previously and just corrected those white areas. It actually was quite simple. I was really worried this was going to be a lot more complicated, and thankfully I've gotten pretty good over the many, many years of painting at pulling a few straight lines. So it actually was a lot simpler than I thought, and I would very much encourage you to give this a try in the future because it's not, like, drawing those kinds of stripes is not as tough as I thought it would be. Just trust yourself. You can do this. With the sword looking fantastic, the last thing to take care of is the base. For the base, I was inspired by one other female content creator out there, and that's Nerdforge, because I realized I don't actually have any winter-themed like texture paints anywhere in my collection. And I wanted something to be able to make the base look like it was covered in snow. And I watched a recent Nerdforge video where she used flour, PVA glue, and water, mixed that all together, and created a paste. And I was like, you know what, screw it, that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try it on this base. I did a little bit of testing to see what ratio of flour I might need, found a good amount, and then applied that to the base in an even coating. And I actually really like the way this ended up drawing. It was a little less poofy than I wanted it to be. It did flatten a bit more than I was anticipating, but the texture is exactly what I was looking for. And then to make this Marine sort of match with the red gobbo that I painted last year, I came back in over that paint and put a little bit of white paint down first, and then we went with Briar Queen Chill. This is a lovely contrast color tone that gives you this sort of ethereal, icy look. It's what I used on the red gobbo's base, and it works perfectly on this Marine space as well. But I wanted to emphasize this one a little bit more. So I came back in with a white dry brush over the base to make it look like there was a dusting of fresh snow over everything. Once I was satisfied with that, I came back in and I applied a couple of tufts. I wanted to bring a little bit more green back into the color palette, but also a little bit more white. So I put some white flowers with some green bases. They look lovely. And then the last thing we need to do is rim the base in black to make it look like a finished scene. And we can finally look at the completed model. Ho, 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 I'm here to slay heretics. This is Captain Kringus, my wonderful Ultramarine that I converted into a Christmas Marine. I love how this project turned out. Something that I talked about in a recent channel update is how I want to really push myself to go the extra mile and bring my paint projects beyond just being table ready. And I was like, you know what? Why do I need to wait until 2024 to do that? I'm gonna start right now with this Christmas Marine, and I think I nailed it. I love all the freehand I did on it. I love the entire concept. Like, it was late at night when I saw this Ultramarine just tucked into like a cabinet, and I was like, holy moly, I can turn that U into a wreath. And I did. And I was very nervous about it because honestly, I wasn't exactly sure how I was gonna do it. I kind of winged it while I was live with chat, and it was a lot of fun doing that. And if you ever do want to hang out with me, I would make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss when I go live for these kinds of painting videos. It's super fun. I love how this guy turned out. It was honestly the seasonal burst that I needed. This season hasn't been the best for me, but bringing this joy into my life with this very dumb, very lovely Space Marine has just been a delight. It's really brought the Christmas joy into my heart. And I hope that it has given you some inspiration to try some freehand. Maybe just turn your Marines into weird creatures and don't follow the normal color scheme. It's really fun to be experimental with them. Anyways, I have been Angela, and I hope that you guys all have a lovely holiday this season, whether you're celebrating Christmas, Hanukkah, or what other season you might be.
Festivus!
Festivus, there you go. Whether you're celebrating any of those things, I hope you have a wonderful time spending it with friends, family, and the people that you love. I want to thank my patrons and YouTube members before I head out this one last time this holiday season for supporting us and making it so like content like this can continue to happen. Without your guys' support, we just would not be doing this, so thank you very, very much. I have been Angela. I will see you in 2024, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday and hobby night.